The weekend was supposed to be her sanctuary, a solo retreat to the coast, to repair a mind frayed by the relentless pressure of the city. Lucas watched her drive away with a heart full of trust, believing the distance was the medicine their marriage needed, until the silence of the empty house was broken by a single notification at midnight. It wasn't a text from her, but a tag from a stranger on a photo that captured what mental health really looked like. His wife, in a bar she shouldn't have been in, smiling at a man who wasn't him. If the anatomy of a betrayal and the unraveling of a perfect life is something you want to witness, stay with me. The rain in Seattle didn't fall. It hovered, a gray mist that clung to the windows of the apartment and turned the city into a watercolor painting of slate and steel. Inside, the air was thick with the specific tension of a departure. Lucas watched Nora zip her weekender bag. She moved with a frenetic energy, her hands shaking slightly as she checked her mental list. Charger, Kindle, melatonin. She looked beautiful, but in a brittle way, like porcelain that had been dropped and glued back together too many times. "You sure you have enough warm clothes?" Lucas asked, leaning against the doorframe. He kept his voice low, soothing, the supportive husband tone he had perfected over the last 6 months. Nora didn't look up. "I'm just going to be inside, Lucas. Reading, sleeping, mostly sleeping." She finally snapped the bag shut and exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to deflate her posture. I feel like my brain is static. If I don't get away from the emails, the clients, the noise, I'm going to snap." "I know," Lucas said, stepping forward to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean into his touch either. "The coast will be good for you. Cannon Beach is quiet this time of year. No signal, just waves. Exactly what the doctor ordered." "Mental health," she corrected him, offering a weak, tight smile. "It's strictly for maintenance." He carried her bag to the elevator. He drove her car to the front of the building. He kissed her forehead through the open window, smelling the familiar scent of sandalwood and rain. "Call me when you get there?" he asked. "I might not have service," she said quickly. "Remember, I'm turning the phone off. Digital detox." "Right. Detox." He watched her taillights merge into the Friday evening traffic, a red blur swallowed by the gloom. He stood on the curb for a moment longer than necessary, convincing himself that the knot in his stomach was just concern, not suspicion. She needed this. He was doing the right thing. The apartment was too quiet when he returned. Lucas ordered Thai food and opened his laptop, determined to distract himself with blueprints for a new landscape project in Bellevue. He worked through the evening, the silence of the room amplifying the solitude. He checked his phone occasionally, habit mostly. No texts from Nora. She was probably already there, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the ocean. He felt a pang of jealousy for the solitude, but quickly squashed it. By 11:30 p.m., the rain had turned into a downpour against the glass. Lucas was closing his tabs, ready for bed, when his phone buzzed on the granite countertop. It wasn't a text. It was an Instagram notification. "Sarah the Explorer tagged you in a photo." Lucas frowned. He didn't know a Sarah. He tapped the screen, expecting a spam bot or a mistake. The app opened, the screen filling with the overly bright, filtered aesthetic of a nightlife post. The photo was a selfie taken by a young woman with neon pink eyeliner, holding a martini glass up to the camera. The location tag read, "The Velvet Note, Portland, OR." Lucas blinked. Portland was 2 hours inland from Cannon Beach. He looked closer. The girl in the foreground was a stranger, grinning widely. The caption read, "Girls' night out, but look at the cuties in the back getting cozy. Chacham love is in the air. Chacham Portland nights." In the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakable to a man who had memorized every line of her face for 10 years, was Nora. She wasn't wearing the oversized sweater she had left in. She was wearing a black dress he hadn't seen in years, and she wasn't alone. She was seated at a small, candlelit booth. Her head was thrown back, laughing, a genuine, open-mouthed laugh that Lucas hadn't earned from her in months. A man's hand was resting comfortably on the nape of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The man was turned away from the camera, but the intimacy of the gesture was screaming. It wasn't the grasp of a stranger. It was the touch of someone who knew he had the right to touch her. Lucas stared at the screen. The tag was likely an algorithmic suggestion or a manual error by the user who saw Nora's profile. Perhaps Nora had been tagged in the location by the venue earlier. Or maybe the stranger just searched for Nora and clicked the first husband she saw to be funny. It didn't matter how the tag happened. What mattered was the timestamp. 25 minutes ago. "Mental health," Lucas whispered to the empty room. The phone felt like a hot coal in his hand. The silence of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. He looked at the screen again, at the joy on his wife's face, a joy that had nothing to do with him. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone. He simply sat there, the blue light of the screen illuminating a face that was slowly hardening into stone. Lucas didn't call her. He didn't scream into the empty apartment or throw the phone against the wall. Instead, a terrifying kind of clarity descended upon him, cooling his blood. He sat down at the kitchen island, placed the phone flat on the granite surface, and treated the device like a crime scene evidence bag. He tapped the screen to keep it awake. The photo stared back. He used 2 fingers to zoom in, bypassing the stranger's smiling face and the neon cocktail, going straight to the background. The resolution was high, too high for Nora's sake. He cropped the world out until only she remained. She was holding a glass of amber liquid. Whiskey. Neat. Nora hated whiskey. She claimed it tasted like iodine. At home, she drank Sauvignon Blanc or herbal tea. But here, in this dimly lit lounge in Portland, she looked comfortable with the heavy glass, swirling it with a familiarity that suggested this wasn't her first round. Then, he moved to the man. The man's face was turned away, a profile obscured by shadow and the angle of the shot. He had dark hair, cut short, and was wearing a charcoal dress shirt, the top button undone. Standard corporate uniform, but it was the hand that held Lucas's attention. It rested on the small of Nora's back, fingers splayed possessively, the thumb rubbing the fabric of her dress. It was the body language of ownership. You don't touch a friend like that. You don't touch a colleague like that. That was the touch of a man who knew the woman's body, who knew he was allowed to claim space there. Lucas felt a phantom pressure on his own chest, a physical manifestation of the betrayal. He clicked on the profile of the user who tagged him. Sarah, the Explorer. Her account was public. Lucas scrolled through her stories. 10 p.m. Portland bound. 11:15 p.m. The Velvet Note is a vibe. He tapped the location tag for the Velvet Note. It was a jazz lounge in the Pearl District of Portland. He opened Google Maps on his laptop. Distance from Cannon Beach, 1 hour, 30 minutes. Could she have driven there for dinner? A harmless excursion? He went back to the photo. Nora's eyes were heavy-lidded, Her lips parted in a laugh that looked intimate, flushed. She wasn't driving anywhere. Lucas opened a new tab on his laptop. He logged into their shared cell phone provider account. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, a moment of hesitation trembling in his knuckles. This was the line. Once he crossed it, he was no longer a husband. He was an adversary. He pressed enter. He pulled up the call and data logs. Nothing unusual. No late-night calls to unknown numbers. She was smart. She was using an app. WhatsApp, Signal, maybe a burner phone. But she had made a mistake. He checked the data usage. There was a spike in data at 7 p.m., right around the time she would have been arriving at the beach house. Then, silence. But at 10:30 p.m., another spike. A large one. Uploading something or streaming music in a car. He switched to their bank account. Nothing. No charges in Portland. She had used cash or, and this thought made his stomach turn over, he had paid for it. The man in the charcoal shirt. Lucas looked back at the photo on his phone. The stranger, Sarah, had captioned it, "Love is in the air." She had seen them. A random bystander had looked at Nora and this man and registered them as a couple. It was that obvious. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the mocking echo of Nora's voice from earlier that day. "I just need to sleep. My brain is static." She wasn't sleeping. She was wider awake than she had been in years. Lucas stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound that signaled the end of his paralysis. He walked to the hallway closet and pulled out his keys. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't brush his teeth. He wasn't going on a trip. He walked to the window and looked down at the rain-slicked streets of Seattle. If he left now, he would hit Portland by 3 a.m. He grabbed his phone, took a screenshot of the photo, and then, with a surgeon's precision, he untagged himself. He wouldn't let her know he had seen it. He wouldn't give her the head start of a notification. He was going to be the ghost she didn't see coming. The garage door rattled as it rose, the sound unnaturally loud in the sleeping building. Lucas backed his car out, the red glow of the dashboard illuminating his face in stark, artificial light. He didn't turn on the radio. The silence was necessary. It was the only thing holding him together. Interstate 5 stretched out before him like a black ribbon, slick with oil and rain. At 1 a.m., the highway was a lonely place, populated only by long-haul trucks and the occasional weary traveler. Lucas merged into the center lane, setting his cruise control to 75, letting the mechanical hum of the engine vibrate through the steering wheel and into his hands. 3 hours. That was the distance between the lie and the truth. As the city lights of Seattle faded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the dense pine forests that lined the freeway, Lucas's mind began to loop. It wasn't a linear thought process. It was a chaotic slideshow of the last 6 months, recontextualized by a single photograph. He remembered a Tuesday 3 weeks ago. Nora had come home late, smelling of rain and something else. Faint, metallic, like the ozone smell of a hotel lobby. She had collapsed onto the sofa, claiming a migraine, her eyes squeezed shut against the light. "I just can't be touched right now, Lucas," she had whispered. "Please, I feel so fragile." He had retreated. He had dimmed the lights, brought her water, and slept in the guest room to give her space. He had treated her like spun glass, terrified that the slightest pressure would shatter her. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. She hadn't been fragile. She had been exhausted from being someone else. The migraine was likely the hangover of guilt, Or perhaps just the physical toll of living a double life. The woman in the photo at the Velvet Note didn't look fragile. She looked voracious. She looked like she was drinking life in gulps, while at home, she barely sipped water. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth. Swish, swish, like a metronome counting down the time to the collision. He passed the sign for Tacoma, then Olympia. The rain intensified, hammering against the roof of the car. He thought about the mental health trip. The term itself felt weaponized now. She had used the language of therapy, boundaries, self-care, burnout, to build a fortress around her infidelity. Who questions a spouse who says they need to heal? Who accuses a wife of cheating when she says she's depressed? It was the perfect cover. It made his suspicion feel like abuse. If he had questioned her, he would have been the unsupportive, suffocating husband. "You're suffocating me, Lucas." She had said that during an argument 2 months ago when he asked why she locked her phone. He looked at the passenger seat. His phone sat there, face down. He had the urge to pick it up, to call the rental agency in Cannon Beach, to call the hotel in Portland, to do something loud and destructive. But he forced his hand to stay on the wheel. The anger was starting to rise now, replacing the shock. It was a cold, dark heat in his chest. It wasn't just the sex. He could almost forgive a drunken mistake. It was the intimacy. It was the hand on her neck. It was the fact that she had curated this trip, packed her bag, kissed him goodbye, and looked him in the eye with a lie that exploited his deepest concern for her well-being. He crossed the bridge over the Columbia River. The sign for Welcome to Oregon flashed past in the darkness. He wasn't going to the beach house. Not yet. The tag had been in Portland. The rental she supposedly booked was 90 minutes west of the city. If she was in the city at 11:30 p.m., she wasn't driving to the coast tonight. He took the exit for downtown Portland. The city rose up around him, quiet and wet, a grid of amber streetlights and shadowed alleyways. He didn't know where they were. He didn't know which hotel, which apartment, but he knew where they had been. He pulled the car over to the curb a block away from the Velvet Note. The street was empty. The bar was closed, the neon sign dark. Lucas killed the engine. The silence rushed back in, ringing in his ears. He sat there for a moment, watching the rain blur the world outside. He felt dangerously calm. He was no longer the husband waiting at home. He was the hunter, and for the first time in a long time, he knew exactly who Nora really was. The Velvet Note remained stubbornly closed, a dark storefront in a sleeping city. Lucas sat in his idling car for 10 minutes, watching the rain streak the window, waiting for a sign that didn't exist. It was a foolish hope that they would stumble out at 2:00 laughing, giving him a target for his rage. But they were gone. They had gone back to the sanctuary. He put the car in gear and turned toward Highway 26, the road that carved through the Coast Range Mountains to the sea. The city lights of Portland dissolved behind him, replaced by the crushing darkness of the towering Douglas firs that lined the highway. The road was winding and treacherous in the rain, demanding a focus that kept him from unraveling. He knew the address. He had booked it for her, after all. The hidden gem with an ocean view. He had paid the deposit with his credit card, a grim irony that tasted like bile in his throat. He was funding his own betrayal. The drive took 90 minutes. 90 minutes of imagining what was happening at the end of the road. Were they sleeping? Were they talking? Was she telling this stranger the secrets she kept from Lucas? The thought of her emotional intimacy with another man was a sharper blade than the physical act. Sex was biology. Conversation was treason. He reached Cannon Beach just before 4 a.m. The town was a ghost, shrouded in a heavy coastal mist that muffled the sound of the engine. He killed his headlights as he turned onto the gravel lane that led up the hillside, navigating by the faint gray illumination of the moon behind the clouds. The rental house sat on a bluff, a modern structure of glass and cedar, looking out over the invisible, roaring ocean. It was beautiful. It was private. It was perfect for a getaway. Lucas rolled the car to a stop 50 yards down the road, tucked behind a cluster of spruce trees. He stepped out into the cold, wet air. The smell of salt and pine hit him instantly, a sensory trigger of vacations past, now corrupted. He walked quietly up the driveway, the gravel crunching softly under his boots. He stayed in the shadows, his breath forming white plumes in the dark. And then he saw them. The driveway was meant for 2 cars. On the left was Nora's white SUV, the vehicle he had packed just hours ago. It looked innocent, familiar. But parked next to it, so close that the side mirrors almost touched, was a car Lucas had never seen before. A sleek black Audi sedan. It was parked at an angle, aggressive and careless, the way someone parks when they know no one is coming to check on them. Lucas stopped. He stared at the 2 machines, metal beasts slumbering side by side. There was an intimacy even in the way they were parked. They belonged together. This wasn't a taxi dropped off for a night out. This wasn't a friend meeting her for a drink. This was a man who had driven here, unpacked his bag, and parked his car for the weekend. He walked closer to the Audi. He placed his hand on the hood. It was cold, but the engine ticked softly as it contracted in the chill air. It had been driven recently. From Portland. He looked up at the house. The windows were dark, gaping black holes against the cedar siding. The for mental health retreat. He walked around the perimeter of the Audi and took a picture of the license plate. The flash of his camera cut through the darkness for a split second, blinding him. He didn't care if they saw the light. Part of him wanted them to wake up. Part of him wanted the confrontation to happen now, in the mud and the rain. But the house remained silent. They were asleep. Safe in the belief that the husband was 3 hours away, dutifully waiting in Seattle. Lucas retreated to the cover of the trees, his eyes fixed on the 2nd floor, where he knew the master bedroom was. He wasn't going to knock. He was going to watch. He needed to see the life she was living when she thought she was invisible. The cold in Cannon Beach was different from the cold in the city. It was wet and saline, a dampness that seeped through layers of wool and settled into the marrow. Lucas stood in the shadow of a spruce tree, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, needle-covered earth. He had been standing there for an hour. The house remained a dark monolith against the graying sky, silent and tomb-like. He began to wonder if he had imagined the car, if the Audi belonged to a previous guest, if this was all a terrible coincidence. Then, a light flickered on. It was a soft, amber glow from the 2nd floor, the master suite. The rental was designed with floor-to-ceiling glass to maximize the ocean view, a feature that now turned the interior into a brightly lit stage for an audience of 1. Lucas stopped breathing. He stepped instinctively closer to the trunk of the tree, though he knew they couldn't see him through the glare of the interior lights. A figure moved across the glass. Nora. She was wearing a t-shirt. Not a robe, not lingerie, but an oversized vintage band t-shirt. Lucas recognized it. It was an old Rolling Stones shirt he had bought at a thrift store in college. It was his shirt. She wore it for comfort, Seeing her in it now, in this house, felt like a violation of history. She moved with a sleepy, loose-limbed grace, running a hand through her messy hair. She wasn't distressed. She wasn't pacing. She looked peaceful. Then, the second figure appeared. The man from the bar. He was taller than Lucas, with a build that suggested gym hours rather than desk hours. He was shirtless, wearing only pajama bottoms. He walked into the frame not with the hesitation of a new lover, but with the casual familiarity of a husband. He walked up behind Nora. He didn't grab her. He didn't pull her into a passionate embrace. Instead, he simply rested his chin on the top of her head. He wrapped his arms loosely around her waist, anchoring her. Nora didn't pull away. She leaned back into him, melting against his chest. She said something. Lucas saw her lips move, a small, sleepy murmur, and the man laughed. It was a soft, private laugh that Lucas couldn't hear but could feel vibrating through the air between them. The man handed her a glass of water. She took it, drank, and handed it back to him. He finished it. That was the moment that broke Lucas. If he had seen them having sex, he could have categorized it as lust, a chemical failure, a moment of weakness. But sharing a glass of water in the middle of the night? Wearing his old t-shirt while leaning on another man's chest? That wasn't an affair. That was a life. She had built a home inside this weekend. She had transported the intimacy that belonged to Lucas, the quiet, boring, safe intimacy of 10 years, and gifted it to a stranger. The man moved away from the window to adjust something on the nightstand. Nora remained for a second, looking out into the darkness. She was looking right at Lucas, though she couldn't see him. Her face was stripped of the makeup she wore for work, stripped of the burnout tension she wore for Lucas. She looked content. She looked like the woman he had married, but she was only that woman for him. The man returned. He placed a hand on the curtain. He said something else to Nora, and she turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Lucas stood frozen in the tree line. The image of them, the domesticity of the water, the t-shirt, the curtain, was burned into his retinas. He felt a physical nausea rising in his throat. He wasn't the protagonist of this story anymore. He was the ghost haunting the perimeter. He turned away from the house, his legs feeling heavy and disjointed. He walked back to his car, the gravel crunching loudly now that he no longer cared about silence. He got into the driver's seat and locked the doors, sealing himself in. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring at the black silhouette of the Audi next to him, realizing that the mental health trip was indeed successful. Nora had found her cure, and Lucas was the disease. The sun didn't burst over the horizon. It bled into the sky, a pale, bruising purple that slowly turned into a washed-out gray. The coastal mist was retreating, pulling back to reveal the wet asphalt of the driveway and the jagged line of the cliff edge. Lucas hadn't slept. He had spent the remaining hours of darkness sitting in his car, watching the house breathe. He had watched the lights go out, and he had watched the stillness settle. Now, he stood outside, leaning against the hood of the black Audi. The metal was cold and damp against the back of his jeans. He crossed his arms, not to keep warm, but to keep his hands from shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the impending collision. At 7:15 a.m., the sound of the electronic lock disengaging echoed in the crisp air. Beep, whir, click. The heavy sliding glass door on the side of the deck rolled open. Nora stepped out. She was wearing a thick, oatmeal-colored cardigan over the t-shirt she had slept in. She held a steaming ceramic mug in both hands, bringing it to her face to inhale the steam. She looked softer than Lucas had seen her in years. Her hair was messy in a way that spoke of sleep and satisfaction, not stress. She took a deep breath of the salty air, closing her eyes, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was the face of a woman who felt entirely safe, entirely hidden from the world. She opened her eyes and looked down toward the driveway, likely checking to see if the view was clear. Her gaze swept over her own SUV. Then it moved to the black Audi. Then it stopped. The mug didn't shatter. Life isn't a soap opera, but her hands jerked, splashing hot coffee over the rim and onto her bare knuckles. She didn't flinch from the burn. She froze, her entire body locking up as if the air around her had suddenly turned to solid ice. Lucas didn't move. He didn't push off the car. He simply tilted his head, acknowledging her presence with a terrifying lack of emotion. "Good morning, Nora," he said. His voice was calm, conversational, carrying easily in the quiet morning air. Nora's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted frantically, first to Lucas, then to the closed door behind her, then back to Lucas, and finally to the license plate of the Audi he was leaning against. He could see the gears turning in her head. She was a crisis manager. Her job was to take disasters, scandals, leaks, bad press, and spin them into manageable narratives. He watched her try to access that part of her brain. He saw the flash of calculation. Could I say he's a cousin, a client, an intruder? But the calculation died instantly. The proximity was too close. The intimacy of the location was too damning. There was no press release that could explain why her husband was leaning against her lover's car at 7 a.m. on a solitary retreat. "Lucas," she whispered. The name came out like a strangled gasp. She took a step back, her hand gripping the doorframe. "Lucas, why are you—" "I was worried," Lucas said, cutting her off. He finally pushed himself off the Audi and took a slow step toward the stairs of the deck. "You said you were burnt out. You said your brain was static. I wanted to make sure the treatment was working." He gestured vaguely to the black sedan. "Is this the therapist?" Nora went pale. The blood drained from her face so completely she looked like she might faint. The afterglow vanished, replaced by a raw, naked terror. She looked over her shoulder at the house, terrified that the man inside would walk out and complete the catastrophe. "Lucas, please," she hissed, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. She walked down the first 2 steps, instinctively trying to intercept him, to keep the blast radius contained. "It's not... Let me explain. Please just... don't go inside." "I don't need to go inside," Lucas said, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at her. He was close enough now to see the dark circles under her eyes, not from exhaustion, but from the late night. He saw the faint redness on her neck, a mark the makeup wipes hadn't quite removed. "I saw the photo, Nora," he said softly. "The velvet note. You look happy in it." The mention of the photo was the final blow. Her shoulders slumped. The defense crumbled. She realized she had been exposed not by a spy, but by her own carelessness, by the digital world she lived in. She started, and then she stopped. Tears began to pool in her eyes, tears of panic, not remorse. "Lucas, I didn't want to hurt you." "That's the most cliché thing you could possibly say," he replied, his voice devoid of warmth. "Go pack your bag, Nora. But leave the t-shirt. I'm taking that back." The black Audi reversed down the gravel driveway with a haste that bordered on pathetic. The man, Mark, as it turned out, a name so common it felt insulting, hadn't looked at Lucas. He had emerged from the house fully dressed, bag in hand, eyes fixed on the ground, mumbling a generic apology that hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Lucas hadn't moved to stop him. He hadn't swung a fist. He had simply stood by the door, holding it open, acting as the doorman to his own humiliation. When the sound of the engine faded into the trees, the silence that rushed back into the house was deafening. Lucas walked into the living room. It was a beautiful space, bathed in the soft, gray light of the coastal morning. There were remnants of the life Nora had built here over the last 24 hours. A half-empty bottle of wine on the coffee table, 2 glasses, a throw blanket pooled on the rug where they must have sat together, watching the fire. Nora sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly between her knees. She was still wearing the cardigan over his old t-shirt. The irony of her wearing his clothes while destroying their marriage seemed lost on her. "You didn't scream at him," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, tinged with confusion. "He doesn't matter," Lucas said. He didn't sit down. He stood by the kitchen island, creating a physical barrier between them. "He's just the prop. You're the scriptwriter." Nora flinched. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and dry. The panic from the driveway had settled into a bleak resignation. "It wasn't about hurting you, Lucas. I know you don't believe that, but—" "Stop," Lucas said, his voice level. "Don't give me the 'it just happened' speech. You drove 2 hours. You rented a house. You lied about your mental health. This was a project, Nora. You managed this affair like you manage a crisis." "I felt dead!" The words erupted from her, sudden and sharp, cracking the polite veneer of the conversation. She stood up, her hands trembling. "I felt dead in Seattle. I felt like a manager. Manager of the house, manager of your schedule, manager of my team. I came home and I was just function. I was Nora the capable. I was Nora the wife. There was no blood left in me." "And Mark gave you blood?" Lucas asked, his tone cutting. "He gave me permission to be messy," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. She wrapped her arms around herself. "With you, everything is so good. You're so good. You're patient. You're kind. You treat me like I'm precious. But sometimes I didn't want to be precious. I wanted to be reckless. I wanted to drink whiskey and laugh at stupid jokes and not worry about the mortgage or the 5-year plan." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the woman he had spent 10 years trying to protect. He had sheltered her from stress, taken on the mental load, walked on eggshells when she had her migraines. He thought he was being a good husband. "I treated you like you were fragile," Lucas said slowly, the realization landing with the weight of a stone. "Because you told me you were breaking. You told me the world was too much." "I lied," she whispered. "I wasn't breaking. I was bored. And I was too cowardly to tell you that I needed something you couldn't give me because you were too busy being perfect." The accusation hung between them. It was perverse logic, blaming his stability for her chaos. But it had the ring of her truth. She hadn't cheated because he was bad. She had cheated because his goodness made her feel suffocated by her own inadequacy. Lucas looked around the room one last time. He looked at the view of the ocean, the crashing waves that were supposed to heal her mind. "You're right," Lucas said. "I did treat you like you were fragile. I thought if I held on tight enough, you wouldn't fall apart." He walked to the door, picking up his car keys from the counter. "But I was just holding together a shell. You were already gone. Nora looked at him, startled. Where are you going? Home, Lucas said. To Seattle. You have your car. You have the rental until Sunday. You said you needed a mental health weekend. He opened the door, letting the cold sea air rush in, chilling the room instantly. Enjoy the silence, Nora. It's all yours now. The drive north was different. The panic that had fueled Lucas on the way down, the adrenaline that had sharpened his vision in the dark, had evaporated. In its place was a numbness that felt strangely like peace. The rain had stopped, leaving the highway dry and gray under a cloudless, indifferent sky. He didn't speed. He stayed in the right lane, watching the miles tick down. Every mile he put between himself and the rental house felt like a stitch being pulled out of a wound, painful, but necessary for the skin to eventually close. He thought about Nora back at the house. He imagined her standing in the window, watching him leave, perhaps relieved, perhaps terrified of the vacuum he left behind. She had her view. She had her silence. She had the freedom she claimed she was starving for. He hoped it tasted as good as she thought it would. Lucas arrived back in Seattle just after noon. The city was bustling with Saturday energy. Couples walking dogs, tourists crowding the market. Life moving forward with an insulting lack of awareness that his world had ended. He parked in his usual spot in the garage. He took the elevator up to the penthouse. When he opened the door, the apartment smelled faintly of the Thai food he had ordered the night before. A scent from a lifetime ago. The silence was absolute. But unlike the suffocating silence of Friday night, this silence felt clean. It wasn't waiting for Nora to come home and fill it. It was just space. His space. He walked into the bedroom. The bed was still made, crisp and untouched on her side. He didn't cry. He felt a profound exhaustion, the kind that settles in the bones after a long illness. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. The screen flickered to life. He navigated to the social media page, not to stalk, but to clean. He pulled up the photo from Sarah the Explorer. It was still there. The likes had gone up. The comments were full of fire emojis and hearts. The world saw a fun night out. Lucas saw the crime scene photo of his marriage. He had already untagged himself in the heat of the moment, severing the digital link. Now, he had to sever the rest. He went to his own profile. Under relationship status, the word married sat there, heavy and obsolete. It felt like a lie. It was a label for a man who didn't exist anymore, a man who believed in mental health weekends and trusted blindly. Lucas clicked edit. His finger hovered over the mouse. 10 years. 10 years of building a life. Merged finances, shared holidays, the slow accumulation of memories. One click wouldn't erase that history, but it would signal the future. He selected the blank space. He didn't change it to single yet. That felt too hopeful. He didn't change it to divorced. That was a legal battle for another day. He simply removed the status entirely. He erased the definition. Save changes. The profile refreshed. The link to Nora's name vanished from his bio. Lucas closed the laptop. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the skyline of Seattle. The Space Needle pierced the gray sky, steady and unmoving. Nora had been right about one thing. The trip had been necessary. She had gone to the beach to find herself, to escape the static of their life. And in doing so, she had given Lucas the clarity he hadn't known he needed. The anxiety that had plagued him for months, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the desperate need to fix her, to save her, was gone. He was alone. And for the first time in a long time, his mind was quiet. The mental health trip had worked. It just hadn't saved the patient she intended. It had saved him.